Hello. Now for today's video, I would like to present a very fascinating object. This is apparently the very first pocket watch which was used with an artillery application for the US Ordance Department. Now, this is during 1829. We have this article that has appeared in I believe it was the American Register, Turf, Register, and Sport magazine. And this reported the story about this watch, which was made by a Mr. Montandon. This is actually misspelled. It's Montandon. It is the Americanization of this, but it's interesting because the French pronunciation of the name would be Montandon. So perhaps by ear, this gentleman who wrote the article was spelling mainly on the pronunciation, but we do know this is Julien Montandon, and he was a watchmaker in Washington, D.C., several blocks from the White House. He did visit the president. He was a watchmaker to at least 3 U.S. presidents that we know of, and he was having a lot of meetings with this John Quincy Adams in the White House, in the Oval Office, where he was actually showing this watch, which we will be speaking of, and some of his other inventions. This is quite fascinating. But this Ordnance Department was reorganized. Now, there had been the artillery, the Department of Artillery, and the Ordnance around 1821 till about, I believe, 1832. The department was reorganized, and previously the chief of the Ordnance had been a Colonel George Bomford, and he terminated his tenure in 1821. However, after it was reorganized, I believe he was brought back. But in the interim, this post was filled by a series of temporary officers. Now, this chief of the Ordnance is actually cited in this article, and I have a suspicion that this is most likely Captain Alfred Mordecai. He would later move much higher in the organization, and he seems to be very key in this. He was a long-term career officer in this office, and has a very interesting history. But let us discuss this article. I would like to read this article very briefly. It's not super long, but it is entitled "New Timekeeper, recommended for timing performances on the turf. An instrument has been lately invented by Mr. Montandon of Washington, which measures small divisions of time with great accuracy, and would, we think, be a very valuable acquisition to all gentlemen who own running or trotting horses, and wish in their private trainings to determine the speed of their horses correctly. It divides time to the 60th part of a second, is put into action by a slight pressure on a spring, and stops on removing the pressure. It has 3 hands on the dial plate, one marking the minutes, one the seconds, and one the thirds or 60th part of a second. It can be used either by setting the hands at a particular point, and which is far the better method, note down the points at which the 3 hands stand, and then at the start touch the spring and keep the pressure upon until the race has terminated. Then noting again the points at which all the hands stand, the difference will give the exact time consumed in the race. It is so nicely constructed that we found upon frequent trials it could be started and stopped within 2/60ths of a second of time, so that the most time which one would be liable to lose in applying the pressure of the finger to the spring and relieving it from the same again is 2/60ths of a second. In running or trotting against time, this is of extreme importance, as the time consumed in starting and stopping the best constructed watches is much greater, and has no doubt been frequently the occasion of losing matches. It is wound in the same manner as a watch, is not much larger than one, and is calculated to run 6 hours. Where two are used, it is the better plan, as it is also with watches, not to try to set them together, as it gives trouble and is seldom accurately done, but to note the points at which the hands of each start them together, and when stopped, note again that the standing points of the hands and the differences will give the time noted on each timepiece, and the mean of the two be the time of the race. In fact, the two pieces should give precisely the same time, and the only cause of difference is in the greater or less time consumed in applying and removing the pressure from the springs, which we have already seen can, with a little practice, be reduced to 2/60ths of a second. The time consumed in a race is generally so short that no inequality in the rates of two well-constructed timekeepers can be supposed to have an influence, but as trotting matches often consume an hour, in such cases the comparative rates of going of the pieces should be previously be accurately determined. The cost of these timekeepers in a silver case is $120. One of them has been purchased and used by the United States Ordance Department, and we have heard the intelligent chief of that department pronounce it the best instrument of the kind that has ever come under his observation. Now, this is most likely Captain Alfred Mordecai. And Mordecai and Julian Montanden's connections are documented in the papers of the president. John Quincy Adams kept an extremely accurate diary over decades, and their comings and goings are noted by the president into the Oval Office, where they're discussing various matters of this watches being used by the military. But here we have, and it has been noted in another article, that these watches were used indeed at the Washington racetracks to time horses. And this was actually in documents retained at the racetrack itself, and later journalists at the end of the 19th century rediscovered these, and this reputable Julian Montanden is listed there as well. So we do know the individual behind this watch. Now, Julian did appear in Washington, they called it Washington City at the time, approximately after 1827. Right in the 1827 period, we find him year after year mentioned in the president's diaries, and as he is fixing clocks and watches in the White House and other offices of the government. But this is quite fascinating that we have so much technical information on this piece. That these were silver pocket watches, and in fact, if we were to go over the all of the information that can be extrapolated from this article itself, we have this Montanden precision timekeeper from 1829. So this is clearly the earliest telemeter in use by the U.S. military. At this point, it was more experimental. However, later they would use it, and indeed, this would be used up until the Civil War. That his inventions were utilized by the U.S. military. But this is the purpose. In this case, we have for timing horses with accuracy. We have time divisions in 1/60th of a second, a 60th part of a second. It was activated by spring pressure manually. Winding mechanism similar to a pocket watch. Indeed, this does give the idea that this may have been in some way altered. They're comparing it to a pocket watch. This may have been, the housing for this may have been different. We do not know what it looks like, and we do not have any known images of this. Now, this is very possibly retained in a back annal of some museum in Washington, perhaps the Smithsonian or the Navy Museum, etc. This is most likely hidden if it still exists. There were many examples of this watch, and it was produced in some volume, certainly. Customers were flocking to this by all the evidence we read in the press articles. Now, back to the technical characteristics. This runtime was 6 hours on a full wind. The accuracy, this could be started and stopped within 2/60ths of a second. There were there were 3 hands, minutes, seconds, and 60ths of a second. The case was silver, the size similar to a pocket watch, compact design, reliability and practice. This was accurate enough for race timing, exceeding typical pocket watches at the time. And the application, it was also used by the US Ordance Department. This was also used in astronomical experiments at the US Naval Observatory in Washington, and experiments on the depths of the sea, and experiments with an 8-inch mortar for artillery fire. This could be also used for measuring running water. But we also have the price, which is very fascinating, that this piece cost $120. And this individual is recommending that 2 be purchased so that a pair can be maintained for, much like atomic clocks are used to determine accuracy beyond any doubts, so that you have a reference point to check. But we are enjoying a lot of data from this article. This manufacturing technology, this was precision crafted with attention to rapid start-stop mechanism. And comparison to other timepieces of the time, this was more accurate than most of in its time, with less lag than traditional watches when starting and stopping the timing mechanism. And the primary benefit was precision in measuring small divisions of time, crucial for racing matches. So we have this really fascinating article about this early, most certainly this is the earliest telemeter in use by the American military. And it was a burgeoning, fledgling country, and it was just beginning to organize such. And they looked to these Swiss masters, these immigrants that came from the old country that had a solid watchmaking basis. So this is very interesting. Now, it should be noted that Julian's sister, the entire family came from Switzerland, and they immigrated in around 1814, 1815. They were briefly detained by the British as spies, but eventually released from, that was in London, and they immigrated to Elizabethtown, New Jersey. And at the very beginning, Julian and his brother Henri Louis, who was a silver master and case maker, he was most apparently doing mainly cases, but the 2 were working in New York, but they were living in Elizabethtown, New Jersey, which is just right across the drink. And the entire family was involved in the watches, from the cases to the end product, including his sister, Julian's sister. Now, she was the wife of Louis Lachaud, who Thomas Jefferson employed as a watchmaker in his community. The position was originally offered to their father, Pierre-Henri. However, he was already advanced in age, and this was definitely something more for a younger man. So this Louis Ami Lachaud took the job, and Sophie Montanin went with him, obviously, and they were frequent guests at Thomas Jefferson's home for dinners. And indeed, Jefferson purchased objects from them, including watches. So it's quite fascinating. And then when both Lachaud and decades later, his wife died, both of them were interred at the Thomas Jefferson family plot in Monticello. So this does tell at the closeness of this family to these early American presidents. But this, I just wanted to make a note for the record about this incredibly accurate timepiece. This timekeeper, this 1829 piece. It's very possible this was, its inception came around 1827. This is about the time that Julian went to Washington, D.C., and indeed he probably had a very good reason to move there. And this, the fabrication of this timepiece may actually have been the reason that he set up shop in Washington, D.C., and on Pennsylvania Avenue, just 2 blocks from the White House. But thank you. I hope this was informative and interesting. And if you have any questions or comments, please leave them on my page. I would be very happy to get your feedback. That's all for now. Bye-bye.